All right. I'm just going to take a moment. Hey, good to see you all this morning. Lovely to see you all. It's lovely to be here. And yeah, we did have a fun time on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But as always, felt very old afterwards, and still do. Unfortunately for you, my voice is back. So you're going to actually have to listen to the sermon. Well, you don't have to listen, but it's going to be there for you to listen to if you want. But if you were here 2 weeks ago, so not last week, we had a fabulous time together as a whole church family, and Jan was speaking. But if you were here 2 weeks ago, you might remember that I made a little sculpture of my own head out of clay, and we were talking about idols and how we were created to be God's idols, to represent Him. But we can very easily fall into the temptation to stop trusting God and to trust in ourselves. And what I found really quite eye-opening and possibly a little bit hurtful was the number of people who afterwards said that they were waiting for me to smash my own head. To smash your idols and things like that. That's where they thought it was going. And so I didn't exactly know how to take that. I get what they were saying, but again, that was my face you're talking about there. But it actually got me thinking. It actually got me thinking a bit more around this. And so we're gonna keep talking this morning about what it means for us to be created in His image, and how we treat image bearers, how we treat ourselves, how we treat each other. Because if we represent God, then that means something, doesn't it? Because when we value something, it comes out in how we treat that thing. Any of you who have had kids before, you'll know that sometimes you try and teach them the value of something because otherwise they would just completely destroy it because they don't understand that that thing cost a lot of money, or that thing is an heirloom and has some significance. To them, it's just something to pick up and throw at you or at their brother or sister or whatever. And so we try and teach them the value of that thing, because when we have value for something, when we value something, we respect it. We treat it with respect. And when it comes to idols, when it comes to statues, when it comes to things that represent, it's not the idol that we value, it's what is represented by the idol that we value, and based on how we treat it. So I want to show you a quick video this morning, and a lot of you will remember this. If you want to play that, Olivia. And that has got some sound, but I don't see, Chris is not in the box, so that's all right. That's okay. You guys get the idea. So this is in Iraq, with that's old Saddam Hussein, big statue of him, and this is news footage of them bringing the statue down, tearing down the statue, and you can see in a second the people in the crowd just rushing in, and how they're, obviously they didn't really like that statue very much, did they? Obviously it wasn't a very good statue. That's fine, you can stop that now, thanks Olivia. Obviously, it had nothing at all to do with the statue itself, did it? It was not the statue that anyone had a problem with. It was what that statue represented. It was not even just the man himself that was represented by the statue, but it was everything that was around him, his regime and everything that meant for those people. It's what was represented. And you can see how much those people valued what was represented by how they treated that statue, can't you? Obviously there was not a lot of love and respect for for Saddam and his regime from those people in how they treated that statue that was representative of him. You know, if we go to Matthew 25, if you've got your Bible with you, otherwise it'll be up on screen. Matthew 25, 34 to 40. It says this: "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' And then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" Here we see in these words of Jesus that he's sharing, we see this whole concept of how people are representatives of the King, of him who created him, how they are all created in the image of God, and how you treat these people is how you treat God. Because they are representative of him, the way you treat them shows your value that you have for he who is represented by them. And that's a hugely challenging thought, isn't it? You know, when we stop and we think about how we treat each other, does that reflect what we truly think about our God and our King? Are the things that we would say to people or about people behind their backs or of people to other people, are they things that we would say directly to God's face? Are they things that show how much we love and care for our God? Our values come from our perceptions. How we perceive a thing is how we value it. And if we perceive people as unworthy, then that's how we will value people as unworthy, and that's how we will treat people as unworthy. But if we see people as worthy, then we value them and we treat them with worth. And we know, as created in the image of God, we know it is not us who is worthy, but it is he who is represented in us who is worthy. The only thing that gives you or I worth is not who we are, but it's whose we are. That is where our worth comes from, and that is where every human being's worth comes from. But you know, for many of us, especially if you've sort of grown up in the church or you've been around for a long time, you may have a story that's been told to you for a long time, or that you've built over time, about this idea that people in our very nature, we are sinful. We have sin in our very nature, and this is what drives the separation between us and God. You guys heard that sort of thing before? And you might think that sounds very biblical. But you see, the problem is, if we are sinful in our very nature, then it means the most natural thing for us to do is to disobey God and to crave sinful things and to do those things. And the inverse of that means the most unnatural thing for any one of us to do is to love and worship God. And if you know your Bible and if you know the story, you know that that's not what we were created for. We were created to love and worship God. We were not created in our very being, in our very core, in our very nature. We were created to love and honor and worship God and to reflect Him to the world. Sin is a corruption that comes into that. And we can see that if we look at Genesis 4. Genesis 4 verses 6 to 7. This is right after Adam and Eve, take of the apple or the fruit. And we have what we later refer to as the fall and things like this. And sin enters the picture. But look at this in verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Where is sin? Sin is not within Cain's heart, within his nature, already there. Sin is crouching at the door, awaiting the opportunity to come in. And God says to Cain, you should master over it. And we know Cain doesn't. But you see, this is not Cain. God doesn't say to Cain, you are now sinful by your very nature. And so the only thing you can do is be disobedient to me and to trust only in yourself and not in me. God doesn't say that, does he? God says that sin is crouching at the door, waiting to take hold, just waiting for the opportunity to be allowed in. So we don't live in a world where sin is within us. We live in a world that tells us to unlock our door, to open it up wide, to open all our windows and let sin in because sin is what we want. That's what the world tells us. That's what we have grown up in. From the moment we were born, we grew up in a world that says you want to let sin in because sin is what you want. And so that's why it feels like it's within our very nature, but that is not how we were created. We were created and we had life breathed into us by the life-giving God as a gift of blessing. The life-giving breath of God is our gift, not because we were good, not because of anything that we had done, but because we were His. He created us, and we were to represent Him. It's a lot more comfortable for us to believe the story that sin is in our very nature, because if we do, it relieves us of a little bit of the guilt and the responsibility, because we can say, that's how I'm created. It's just who I am. When we succumb to sin, we can go, well, I'm a sinful person and it's part of who I am. So it relieves us a little bit of that guilt. It's a lot more frightening for us to accept that we were created for life and not for death. Because then the responsibility is for us to choose life and not choose death, which is all around us. But you see, what has this got to do with being image bearers? If we see people, whether it's ourselves or other people, as inherently evil, then how can we assign any value to that? How can we genuinely love another person if we believe at the core of their being they are evil? It would be quite difficult for us to, if not impossible for us to conjure up love for something if we had no value for it? How can we treat other people with love and respect if we think in the core they are evil? But if we can see in people that they were created in the image of God, blessed by Him, given life by Him, loved by Him, and created to desire, to reflect and worship Him, then it's a lot easier for us to turn our hearts in love to that, isn't it? And this seems a very small point, and it might seem insignificant, but this really was a paradigm shift for me when I started to really see people as created in His image. And no matter who those people were, whether those people were people that I would consider enemies, whether those were people that I didn't get along with, whether those were even people that I just genuinely really didn't like, for me to actually stop and actually see those people as created, molded by the hands of the living God, having life breathed into them by the King of Glory, then I was able to see those people as having inherent worth and value. Again, not because of who they were, but because of whose they were. And so it meant I would stop myself when I started to get angry or upset or whatever towards them, and come before God and say, I'm sorry, God. Because if I think that towards them, then is that what I'm thinking towards you, God? It made me check myself a lot, and it still does. It helps me to check myself. One author says this: blessing is the home and sin is the stranger. We were created to reflect the image of the living God out into the world and to multiply that blessing to all the earth. Sin is the corruption and the stranger that comes in and distorts that. And all of us know, every single one of us here know, that although we are all created in the image of God, we are a corrupt and distorted image. None of us are a perfect reflection of who God is. Not one of us, not even close. And we know that even more so for people of the world. It's not about being a perfect image, but it is about who we were created to be. You know, Psalm 139, verse 14 says this: I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Isn't that a remarkable verse? That you and I are fearfully and wonderfully made. Not an accident, not a chance, not just the result of, your parents coming together and here you are. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And, this is the kind of verse that we might stick on a mug or on a poster on the fridge to remind us of this, and that's great. Are we willing to allow that verse to apply to other people? Are we willing to allow that verse to apply to our enemies? Are they also fearfully and wonderfully made? Are they also handcrafted by God? Whoever your enemies might be, and it's a funny word because often we don't think in terms of this, but then you might have anything like that. For some people it might be the government. For some people it might be, people of other religions. You might see them as enemies of God and of His people. you might see, Muslims or things as enemies. You might see, people who are assigned to the whole gender dysphoria thing as enemies of God and all this, and hence your enemy. Whoever your enemies might be, are you willing to allow them to be fearfully and wonderfully made as well? Are you willing to allow them to be created in His image? Because if we are, and if we can, then it can really help us turn our hearts to love, with love toward them. Again, not loving the distortion, loving the image, and loving the God who created them. There's a huge invitation here to really relish in our inherent worth as children of God. I mean, it's one of those phrases that we throw around enough that it's lost some of its impact. But how often do you stop and just marvel at the fact that you were created by Him? And He wanted to create you. I know there's days where I sit there going, God, why? Why would you want to create me? But He wanted to create me, and He wanted to create you because He wanted you. He wanted to know you. He wanted to spend time with you. He wanted to, and still wants to, wait until you wake up in the morning so He can see your face turn to His and His heart skip a beat because His beloved is finally awake. Each and every one of us. It's remarkable. And that doesn't require us to make God smaller, to have a God that loves us. Sometimes we often hear this the idea that we have to find the balance between a loving God and an awesome, powerful, mighty God who, God is both, and God can be both. And it's even more powerful to know that the creator of the heavens and earth and the sovereign God over all things loves you and created you. What an invitation. And what a challenge it is for us to then go, well, God, how are we reflecting you? And what a challenge it is for us to go, God, how are we treating your other idols, your other image bearers? And what does that say about what we think of you? Matthew 22, 34 to 40 says this. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert of the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Trying to trip him up. Trying to get him to pick one of the greatest commands. And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. Very familiar text, isn't it? One we know well. How often have you noticed that little bit in between? And the second is like it. This is the exact same concept. Because how we love God is reflected in how we love others. We can't sit there and say, God, we love you and we worship you with all our mind, body, and soul and strength, but people, no thanks, can't do that. That's not an option. That's not an option. Because people reflect the glory of God. Even if that reflection is so distorted and marred that we can't even see it, that is what they were created for. And so we are to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, because the two are really like one. And this is not saying, I don't want anyone here this morning to hear me saying that people are gods. All right? I think I've covered that enough, but just to be clear, we are not God. Just because we are created in the image of God, we are not God. I don't think there's anyone here sitting there who thinks they're God. Hopefully not. But we're not. And people aren't God. That's not what I'm saying. But we were created by God to reflect Him. So there's an invitation there for us to love our King. And what an honor and a blessing it is to be able to love Him in return. He gives us that gift to be able to worship and love Him, to respond to the love He has for us. There's also an invitation to love each other. Each other in this room, each other in our world, each other in our families, each other in terms of our neighbors, and also in terms of our enemies. To love each other. There's also an invitation in this, and this can be hard for many of us. There's an invitation for us to love ourselves as image bearers. You know, you might go, well, I'm okay. I treat others really well, and I love other people, and I can see them as bearers of His image, and I treat them with the dignity and the respect that they deserve because of who they are. But when it comes to treating ourselves, we are also created in God's image. And so if we think ourselves as worthless, if we attack ourselves and put ourselves down and destroy ourselves, then we are doing that to God as well, in the same way as if we did that to another person. Now, if you're anyone like me, then you know that that can be a real challenge. Because there's all sorts of things that come into our life from the moment we're born that we grow up with, where we start telling ourselves in that little voice inside our heads that we're not good enough. That if I put myself down first, then no one else can get to it before me. I'll be the first to belittle myself because then no one else can. But we are attacking an image of God when we do that to ourselves. So there's an invitation within that to love others as we love ourselves. To love ourselves as image bearers of our King. To start to see ourselves the way God sees us, as His beloved. And you know, that doesn't mean we gloss over all of the imperfections and all of the corruption. Because as we start to love ourselves the way God loves us, we begin to see that all of those things that distort us are destroying the blessing of life that God has for us. And we want to see that gone from our lives, because we want to reflect Him as well as we can, because we want the rest of the world to know that love that we know from Him. So I'm going to wrap up there, but what I'm going to do is just going to take a moment, if you're happy to, at the end here this morning, and just where you are, just reflect on a couple of those things. Just reflect on how you treat other people as image bearers of God. And what does that say about your value that you have in their Creator, in God? And the Spirit might be prompting something in there that you need to bring before Him in repentance. Say, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I've treated. There might be specific people. You know, I'm sorry I treated, this person that way at the office. She just really grates on my gears and da da da. Da. But God, I can't be like that toward her because you have created her in your image. So there might be something there that comes to mind. But there might also be that internal attack within yourself where you have attacked the image of God that is in who He has created you. And you might have to bring that to the foot of the cross and say, God, I'm sorry. Will you help me to see me through the eyes that you see me through? Will you help me to know that I am loved? Maybe while I was talking about being fearfully and wonderfully made, you can hear those words up here, but they don't get all the way down here. Whatever it is this morning, I'd just like you to take some time. We won't be ages on this. We're just going to take a moment. You can bow your head if you want. You don't need to. But just bring your heart before God and say, God, will you reveal to me how I've been treating others, how I've been treating myself, or will you show my soul how much you love me this morning?